Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that's been Dry Lakes racing its way through Friday the 13th, The Killer Cut, 13 minutes at a time. I am Brian.
And I'm mannequin fan Greg.
Ew. Forgot about that part. This segment begins with Jenna interfering with the bro-off and ends with Clay and Jenna trying to hide somewhere.
Clay decides to back down from Trent's challenge, and vice versa. Jenna escorts Clay back outdoors to his bike, where he says, "I do not have a car, but I have her," like his bike is the Millennium Falcon or something. He says he's going to look on the other side of the lake. She volunteers to go with him. So then he has to, bring her back? I mean, that just seems like he's going to have to go out of his way to return her to her friends when he could continue on his quest.
My wife had a real problem with this scene, too, because she didn't like how Jenna was just kind of wandering off with someone that she really just doesn't know at all, but just agreed to spend the day with her. So that was one of the gripes that my wife had.
We return our attention back to Donnie, the yokel from the wood chipper. He's coming back to the barn after having gone out and harvested some of that weed that everyone keeps finding. He lights up a joint with a cool shotgun-style lighter, and then opens an issue of Hustler and licks the centerfold. I could see that there was an article in this magazine about prison pussy, but I used that to try and figure out online exactly what issue of the magazine it was. And then my IT department told HR, and it turned into this whole big thing. So,
and your membership expired, and you didn't have access to the platinum pages.
Right. Hustler was started in 1974 in good old Cincinnati, Ohio, by the late Larry Flint. There are still a few Hustler stores around the area. One is right across the highway from that giant statue of Jesus that burned down one time. I always kind of wondered why Larry Flint didn't have a gigantic gold statue of himself erected.
Before Donnie can round third and head for home, he hears a noise upstairs, so he goes to investigate. Up there in the barn, it's kind of like a junk room. It's just filled with, a bunch of different things.
He's armed himself with a croquet mallet because he thinks it's the person who's been stealing the kerosene lately. This could be a reference to The Shining, but it would be the novel, not the movie. One of the things that I saw in the junk room upstairs was a chair with the seat cut out of it, like that scene in Casino Royale. I wonder if Mr. Garrett likes Dutch scratching. My wife pointed out an old sewing machine on the floor, but there wasn't enough detail in the image for me to research the make and model.
There's a figure in the back of the barn that's covered with a tarp, so Donnie walks up and pulls down the tarp to reveal a very harmless mannequin. We learn that this is Gina, and that Donnie and Gina once spent a special night together. Gina apparently took Donnie's virginity, and can we please just move on?
Well, except that Gina doesn't seem to have legs. That makes it even worse. And I mean, there's only one mannequin I'd ever fuck, and she's a genius at creating department store window displays with Andrew McCarthy.
But before this mannequin is on the move, out of focus in the background, we see Jason emerge from the shadows in a really cool shot. Donnie hears Jason sneaking up on him, and just as he turns around, the two get into a brief scuffle. Donnie's actually able to pull off Jason's mask, which upon closer examination appears to be kind of wrapped around his head rather than a sack that's pulled over his head. So I kind of like that detail. It looked like there's a little bit more attention, put into, how it's actually applied to his head.
We get a pretty brief glimpse of the ruin beneath this hood. Jason's got a little bit of a five head going on and something creepy going on with his mouth, but it's really hard to see exactly what's going on. Donnie says, "That shit ain't fucking right." Maybe be a little nicer to the deformed man who is now accosting you in the loft? This obviously rubs Jason the wrong way because he lamely slices Donnie's neck with his machete. Donnie was played by Kyle Davis, who appeared on Dexter and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. A ton of commercials also. And apparently he's blind in one eye.
Hey, just like me. With Donnie now out of the way, Jason bends down to pick up the sack that he was wearing. But under the clutter on the ground, he finds a hockey mask, which he completely ignores, and we never see it again. Actually, he puts it on, and we get a nice little reveal of Jason looking at himself in the mirror as he puts on the hockey mask. There was actually an alternate version of Donnie's death that had Jason coming down the stairs from the barn upstairs carrying the 2 cans of gasoline or kerosene that Donnie thought that someone was stealing. Meanwhile, Donnie was downstairs in the barn doing God knows what while wearing the hockey mask. And Jason walks up to him, cuts off Donnie's head, and then puts the hockey mask on and walks away, which I don't think is as cool of an introduction to the hockey mask as what we actually got.
I agree with you. I like the film version better, although the alternate version does answer a question that I have coming up in a little while. So what do you think of this, of the film version as an explanation for where Jason gets his hockey mask? You know, compared to part 3 where it was Shelley playing a prank with a wetsuit and a hockey mask. What do you think of Jason coming across this goalie mask in an attic full of junk?
I think it's fine. It's a little convenient that it just happened to be sitting right there, but I also don't really know why he decided at that point that the sack wasn't good enough and then he was going to switch to the hockey mask. Like, why do you need to stick with the sack? But it's okay. I definitely prefer what we got in the film is the version of how he picked it up, but there's no real good way that he could acquire the mask and have it really make sense. I mean, he's got to steal it from someone and he needs to put it on for some reason. So in this case, the sack came off and then he saw the mask and the hockey mask and was like, well, I guess this will be better. And he puts it on and he even kind of looks in the mirror to see if he likes it. And I guess he was happy with what he saw because then he just walks away.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Although I wish that the sack or the hood had maybe like gotten ripped apart in the scuffle so that he couldn't have put it back on, because it doesn't really make any sense why he would think the hockey mask would be better than what he had, other than for obvious marketing purposes. So if his hood had been destroyed or, you know, burned up or something, like that would have been an explanation. Well, I got to just have something over my face. But yeah, I mean, as always, it's a weird question of why Jason would cover his face at all and why he would choose a hockey mask, which, as cool and scary as it looks to us, doesn't have the same cultural impact in universe. So it's always a little bit of a tough explanation to get.
It also doesn't, I mean, if he's wearing a mask to hide his deformity, it doesn't do nearly as good of a job as the sack would. Now, obviously, someone walking around with the sack on their head is, you know, going to attract some attention, but the hockey mask just barely covers his face, and you can still see that there's something off going on underneath it. Somewhere in the woods, Jenna and Clay are just wandering around talking about his sister, and we learn that Clay and Whitney were close until he left home when he was 17, and she stayed to take care of their sick mother. He says that the last time he talked to her was actually about 6 months ago because they had a fight about something. And as they're walking, Clay somehow manages to find a broken GPS device on the ground, which we know was Wade's.
Right. So that means that people have found the weed repeatedly. Now they've found the GPS, but all the tents and sleeping bags and stuff from 6 weeks ago are gone. So I'm wondering if Jason took them home and is, you know, set up a little fort or something that he's, you know, with all this great camping gear.
And that Clay managed to find this GPS device rather easily, but the cops, who have apparently been searching the area for weeks, never saw it.
I have some serious questions about the efficiency of the Crystal Lake Police Department. Out on the lake, Chelsea is wakeboarding with no top, and Nolan is driving the boat, paying less attention to what's in front of him than the boaters at the beginning of sleepaway camp.
My wife did want me to point out that she was very concerned that Chelsea was not wearing a life jacket during this scene.
She had ample flotation devices. Back at the house, the rest of the gang are playing beer pong, and when Trent misses a shot, he's told he has to shoot the boot, which is a rugby thing where you drink beer out of a disgusting used rugby shoe. He refuses, And Chewie and Lawrence call him a felching, welching jerk or something like that. And it makes me think that I'm going to start calling you Felchy Welchy.
Go for it.
Topless Chelsea bites it on the wakeboard, but before Nolan can swing around to pick her up, he is drilled through the head by an arrow. Fantastic surprise kill. Didn't expect that to happen. The only thing I have to complain about is that we really didn't get very much of Nolan in this movie. He had a couple of great moments, but we didn't really know him very well. So while this is surprising, it just feels like it robbed us of a character a little bit too quickly.
Yeah, he quickly was one of my favorite characters in the movie, so it was a shame that they just kind of disposed of him that quickly. Because I could, certainly would rather see more scenes of Nolan than, Bree walking around with her video camera or something.
Nolan was played by Ryan Hansen, who I say with no sarcasm is one of the most underrated comedy actors in Hollywood. He was first noticed as Dick Casablancas on Veronica Mars, and then went on this same year to play Kyle Bradway on the absolutely fantastic sitcom Party Down. He's been in a bunch of stuff since, including a YouTube Red series called Ryan Hansen Solves Crimes on Television, which I am absolutely going to watch.
I also saw that he's Grunt in G.I. Joe Retaliation, but I don't remember that at all.
Oh, that's right. He was killed off really quick.
He must have been in the same scene as Channing Tatum.
So, one of the big criticisms that people have of this movie is that there's not enough character development for the victims. And that's kind of valid. I feel like even in part one of the original, we spent more time with the people before they died. So I can't really argue with that complaint.
Now that Nolan is doing his best Steve Martin impression with the arrow through his head, he slumps onto the controls of the boat and sends it hurtling toward Chelsea, who's treading water. She's oblivious to what's happened to Nolan, and the boat slams into Chelsea. It dazes her, but doesn't kill her. We then see that Jason is watching all of this from the shore with a bow in his hand, so we know that Jason was the one that struck Nolan down.
How do you feel about this kill? What do you think of Jason knowing how to use a bow and arrow?
I think it's fine, and based on what we see of Jason later on in the movie, it tracks with the kind of direction that they were taking him in. He's this wild, woodsman, and I would imagine that he would know how to use a bow and arrow. My wife disagrees. She really did not like that Jason was able to hit Nolan from, seemingly a few hundred yards away, which, that's fine. It's a valid criticism, but I don't doubt that Jason is capable of operating a bow and arrow and doing so well. He's got probably quite a bit of free time on his hand and can go practice.
I kind of love it. It's definitely a departure, and I think some people were up in arms about it because he's never really used projectiles before. He's thrown stuff occasionally, but this is truly using a projectile weapon. But I thought it was really cool and made total sense because he would have to hunt for food, and he lives at a camp where they have archery targets. So like you say, he would be able to practice and get pretty good with it. And it's one more thing that makes him remind me of John Rambo in First Blood. And like as a woodsman and as a utilitarian pragmatist who, why wouldn't he use a bow and arrow? It's not a gun. I'd be concerned if Jason was using mechanisms, but this is really just a simple, primitive tool. Granted, it's fancy camp equipment, but the principle of it is a pretty simple thing. He could have made it out of a stick. So I kind of loved it, and I would like to see more of that.
I also like the idea of Jason just spending lots of time on the shore with his bow and arrow and trying to hit boats as they go by. And he's never hit one until Nolan. And so then he gets Nolan and we get a little fist pump scene of him on the side where he's like, yeah!
That's the first time we hear Jason speak. He goes, yes! Oh, that's awesome.
He's just taking pot shots at boats as they go by. And he's like, oh, damn it. I just missed that one.
Chelsea is struggling to stay afloat, but she spots Jason watching her from the trees and freaks out, rightly. She starts to swim off to find some semblance of safety. Meanwhile, Jenna and Clay find the old camp and wander in. they start to check out some cabins.
Back at the lake, Chelsea has barely made her way to a dock, which she quietly hides under. Jason is stomping above, but doesn't appear to notice Chelsea at first. Just as Chelsea thinks she's safe, a machete comes through the dock, stabbing Chelsea through the top of the skull. Jason pulls the machete up, pulling Chelsea up to the dock until he manages to free his machete, and then Chelsea sinks to the bottom of the lake, and Jason walks away. So R.I.P. Chelsea.
I like the little gout of blood that runs down her head from the machete wound. That was creepy.
Yeah. Also notable as my wife's favorite kill of the movie.
Oh, funny. There's another moment where Jason pauses to enjoy a flock of water birds taking flight after killing Chelsea. He has the soul of a poet.
So even though this was my wife's favorite kill in the movie, there was an alternate version that I have to admit I like a little bit better. She was originally supposed to drown due to exhaustion after treading water for hours as Jason waded her out from the shore of the lake.
Ooh.
Which I think is really cool and brutal because, like, she's too tired to swim to another part of the shore. And even if she did, it's very easy for Jason just to walk over there. So she can't go anywhere. And so she's just waiting him out and he's waiting her out, knowing that he's going to win this battle.
I'm of two minds. I like that concept a lot. And it's super chilling. But I don't know that it fits Jason. It's a little too passive aggressive for him. And it also means that he's got to stay there for so long when he's got other business he wants to take care of.
That's a good point.
So I mean, I would love to see that in a movie, but I think they were wise to change it for this.
Or an alternate to that could be he's sitting there watching her tread water for an hour or so, and then like just to mess with her, and then he pulls out the bow and arrow and shoots her from the shore. Just like tortured her for a while and then just killed her.
Chelsea was played by Willa Ford. She hasn't done a ton acting-wise, but did play Anna Nicole Smith in a movie. She was better known for a while as a musician. She had a song on the soundtrack of Pokemon, the first movie, and an album in 2001. But apparently she blames the tragedy on September 11th, 2001 for the end of her music career because she had a second single that was released on that very day. And of course, no one was paying any attention to music on that day. There's even an article on page 6 that starts with, September 11th didn't just take thousands of lives. It also took Willa Ford's career.
Hashtag never forget Willa Ford's music career.
It's now twilight as Clay and Jenna check out one last cabin. It looks almost exactly like the interior of the Voorhees house, and we get another goddamn tour. But there is one really creepy-ass mask hanging on the wall behind Jenna. It's almost like a Japanese kabuki mask. Jenna crashes through a weak spot of the floor, in which they find a really creepy-ass eyeless baby doll. Night has now fully fallen, so they decide to leave, but Clay has to stop outside briefly to put fresh batteries in his lamp. They hear someone approaching and hide under a rack of canoes. It's Jason, carrying a body-sized bundle over his shoulder. That's where this segment ends, with Clay and Jenna hiding under the rack of canoes. There were 3 victims this episode: Donnie the local, Nolan/Kyle, and Chelsea.
And Willa Ford's music career.
Aww.
To hear more about my special night with my mannequin Annie, turn in next week for another episode of You're All Doomed.